Well, hello. Good morning. Hello. How are you? We're going to do a design stream. Well, actually, not a design stream, but a design commentary stream. I just released Dragon Slayers yesterday, the PDF version of it on itch. And I like doing these design commentary streams where I kind of just go through the game, talk a little bit about why it was designed the way that it was. We're not going to read the whole thing, certainly, but we're going to just kind of go through the major points. I'll just stop and talk a little bit about why things work the way that they do in Dragon Slayers. And hopefully, either this shows you a new game that you might be interested in, or if you already have Dragon Slayers, maybe this is going to help you understand some of the reasons behind why it's designed the way that it is, give you a better appreciation for it. Before we begin, I just want to highlight two things real quick. One, I'm just getting over a cold, so if I sound a little sniffly or a little odd, I'm just getting over being sick, so I apologize for that. And second is I have a baby, and if you see me looking over to the left a lot, it's because I'm looking at her monitor. It also means that if you're watching this live and or later, and there's a title at the top that says part one, that means she woke up at some point and I had to stop the stream and take care of her. And we did this in multiple segments. So we're going to try to do this all in one go. But if we end up having to stop, I'll finish this at another point in time. So let's hop into what Dragon Slayers is all about. Um, First of all, I just want to highlight the cover and the art and layout that you're going to see throughout this whole thing is by Mike Riemann, very good friend of mine, fantastic artist and graphic designer. He did an incredible job with Dragon Slayers. He's also the one that did the art and layout for Slayers, the updated art and layout for it. So it made sense to bring Mike back and have him do the stuff for Dragon Slayers. Dragon Slayers, by the way, why is it called Dragon Slayers? This is a high fantasy game. And Dragon Slayers has multiple layers to why it's called that. Slayers is in the name to show you that it's part of the Slayers system family. It's going to use the same rules essentially as Slayers with some modifications. So that shows the connection between the two games. But also, Dragon Slayers implies, okay, you're going to go hunt dragons, perhaps. This is going to be a high fantasy sort of game. Also, this is my D&D killer. This is the game that I think you should play instead of D&D if you want that like classic heroic fantasy game. So this is me killing the dragon game with Dragon Slayers. There's layers to it. All right, so let's hop past all of this stuff and get into the meat of the game. Like I said, it's a fantasy game, dragons, adventures, all that good stuff. Um, what is this game? Like I said, fantasy game. It is built on Slayers, which means that it uses the same system as Slayers. If you're not familiar with Slayers, that's totally fine. That was a game that I released 4 years ago. It's a monster hunting game in a cursed city, a city that sort of expands infinitely towards the horizon, and you go hunting monsters in all these cool districts. And I thought, okay, that was sort of a fantasy game of sorts when I created it, but it's not like a high heroic fantasy game. So why not make that? Why not use that system and make a heroic fantasy game? The thing that you need to know, and it's highlighted right here, the heart of Slayer's games is the idea of asymmetry. Um, Asymmetry is this idea that I think is really well done in board games and not as it's not that it doesn't happen in role playing games. I just don't see it as often as I would like. Or when people say asymmetrical, I don't think it's as asymmetrical as they mean. Asymmetry means that players are sitting down and playing the same game, but they're playing essentially two different games at the same time, or multiple different games, depending on how many players you have. The go to example that I have for a board game is Root. I love Root. It's such a good game. It's ostensibly an area control board game of woodland factions taking over and controlling a forest, but it's not really an area control game because not every faction cares about holding territory in this place. Every player when you sit down to play Root, is playing a completely different game. One person is playing like an engine builder. Another person, instead of playing a whole massive faction, is playing one little raccoon running around the forest. That level of asymmetry is awesome. The reason it works in board games is because usually everybody's united on trying to get something like points, right? Whoever has the most points wins. So, in order to have asymmetry in a role playing game, you need a unifying mechanic, which we'll get to in just a second. But I just felt like we needed asymmetry in role playing games because and this is an example that I used in Slayers and I use it here as well. Like a fighter and a wizard should play totally different from each other, and they don't. They don't when you have a core mechanic that is like roll d20 and add modifier to solve most things. And so I wanted them to feel really, really different. And so that's sort of the origin of asymmetry here. This is just a hint as to what that asymmetry might look like between the classes. You'll see it when we go into the classes themselves. The heart and soul of Dragon Slayers, besides asymmetry, is the rule of 4+. This is how asymmetry works. Anytime you're going to roll a die, regardless of size or result or anything like that, 4 and above is a hit. That means you accomplished whatever that roll was for. That means you can roll a d4, you roll a d6, d8, d10. All of those things are going to change your odds, right? Like a d4 only has a 25% chance of hitting, d6, 50%, etc., etc. It also means that we now, sitting down with our asymmetrical classes, can roll very different dice from one another. I might be rolling like pools of d4s while you're rolling a single d10 for your character. And at the end of the day, all we really care about is which dice are coming up as a 4+. That is the thing that weaves together the asymmetry. Just like in Root, the only thing that you care about is victory points. As long as you're getting victory points, you can compare how you're doing versus the other players at the board game. Same thing here. You can compare how you're doing alongside your fellow heroes in this game by looking for 4+. It also means you know exactly when monsters are succeeding because they also need 4+ in order to accomplish their things. It just simplifies and streamlines everything. Also, this piece of art, I didn't even notice it the first time, but this is a heart that has a 4+ kind of like sewn into it via the arteries and the veins and whatnot. Mike is very good at art. Mike is very, very good at art. And I didn't notice this the first time, and it's very, very good. All right, so hold that idea of 4+ as the core mechanic in your head. That can be modified, right? So anytime you get a plus or -1, that applies to all the dice, right? So if I have a +1 modifier and I'm rolling 3d6, that's +1 on every single one of those dice. That really gives me a chance of hitting. It could also be a -1, which means I'm going to have really bad odds of hitting. Advantage and disadvantage in this game works a little bit different than others, where in other games you roll double the dice and keep the best. This is you roll all the dice with advantage, and anything that isn't a hit you re-roll, so you get a second shot essentially. And disadvantage is anything you roll that is a hit, you have to re-roll, and you get to keep a second shot in case it turns into a miss. This is something that I'm going to talk a little bit about in a few different places, but it's this idea of when do we roll? You're going to roll for things like skill actions, and you're going to roll a lot in combat. But what about other things like, do I know this thing, or perception checks and stuff like that? We're going to cover those things when we get to those sections, but I'm going to kind of highlight to you that in this game, I don't think we should be rolling dice a lot unless we're in combat. A last bit of mechanical stuff that you should know is this idea of stepping up and stepping down. Stepping up and stepping down is especially important related to the hero die and the wealth die, which are things we'll talk about. But stepping up and stepping down just means increasing or decreasing the size of a die. Since Dragon Slayers uses a full polyhedral set, you'll be potentially changing the size of dice as you use them. So stepping up, a d6 could become a d8, or vice versa, a d6 becomes a d4 when you step down a die. Dragon Slayers goes up to 12-sided dice. We never use the d20. It's a dragon game killer. We would never use a 20-sided die in this. So all of that for the most part, is going to be very familiar territory to folks who have played or read Slayers. Here's one of our big deviations from Slayers, which is this idea called the hero die. Alongside all your other dice that you have this sort of resource, which is the hero die. It starts off as a D4 because you're lowly new heroes in the beginning, but you're going to get more and more powerful as you go. And this is a die that you can pick up and roll anytime you're rolling dice. And you roll it alongside any other dice that you're rolling. And this die can now be either an additional hit if you're rolling a pool of dice and it matters how many of those are hits. This is potentially another hit. For example, I know we haven't talked about it yet, but the barbarian class, their whole thing is rolling a big pool of dice and trying to get as many hits as possible so that they do a bunch of harm. They can throw that hero die into that pool, and now they have one more shot at doing a bunch of damage. This die could also be used alongside maybe a smaller die that you have to increase the odds that you succeed on something. For example, we're going to get to skill checks in a little bit, and maybe you're trying to negotiate with somebody and you don't have a very good negotiation skill. You might roll your hero die alongside that, and maybe your negotiation die doesn't hit, but this one does. Now you've succeeded. Every time you use this hero die, it steps down in size until it eventually vanishes and you get it back later on. And so this is just sort of a bit of like ammo in your back pocket to just pull out when you need it in that right moment. The reason this die exists is because I want this to feel like a heroic fantasy game. I want there to be situations where you can, even when it seems unlikely that you're going to succeed, that you have a good shot at succeeding. And it's just simply a bit of resource management that goes alongside all of that. So I really like the hero die. I also like the art that goes with this spread of this hero. She's just screaming at this giant toothy monster right here. It's very good. Speaking of skills, there are only 6 skills in this game. I don't like super long skill lists, so I think we can basically boil everything down to these 6 things: athletics, brawn, deception, hunting, negotiation, and read. And I think more or less that covers everything. Notice that there is no perception skill there. And we're going to talk about why there is no perception skill in a little bit. But how skills work in this game is just like everything else. They're going to use that polyhedral set. You're going to assign sizes of dice to these in the very beginning. And just like everything else, the rule of 4 plus exists. So if I have a D8 in deception, it means I'm probably pretty good at deceiving. Every time I roll that 8-sided die, I just need a 4 or above. Those are pretty good odds. I might have a D6 or something in athletics, which means I've only got like a 50-50 shot at my climbing or leaping instances. These skills are going to get higher as you advance your characters. And again, it's just that 4 plus that's just going to be kind of moving through everything in this game. I quite like the knowledge domains thing that I've done here. This is a thing that shows up a lot in role-playing games of character or players asking the GM questions about the world. Does my character know this? That's a question that gets asked a lot. Would my character know that? Does my character know why blank? And it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask because we as players don't know the world like the GM does, and for some reason, we don't know what our characters know, which is an interesting thing, right? To not know what you know. And so I went with this idea of knowledge domains, which is basically when you create your character, you're going to choose one of these big domains of the world: crime, faith, history, magic, monsters, settlements, and wilds. And when you choose this, basically, you know a pretty good amount about everything related to that field. So if I know history, if that's my domain, I know a lot about a history. And so anytime something comes up in the game that's related to history, my character probably knows about it or has a decent shot at knowing about it. Anything that comes up that's about crime, my character probably knows about it, right? So if I have the crime domain, I probably know if there's a thieves guild in this town or not, or how influential they are. If I know the settlements domain, then I probably know if there is a town nearby or what that town trades in or something like that. I have the wilds domain. I know a lot about this mountain range. I've heard about it or I've traveled through it, and that's cool. Now you know stuff right away, and that's also super valuable for the GM because the GM can ask you about these things, right? The GM can be like, "Hey, what, you have the wilds domain. Tell us a little bit about this forest. What's a thing or two that we should know about it?" And this allows sort of some reciprocal world building to take place between GM and players with this stuff. Chris McDowell, who is a amazing designer, created Mythic Bastionland, Electric Bastionland, Into the Odd, um, incredible designer, and he has routinely said, like, give your players information, right? Like, don't hide this stuff. Don't have them ask, do I know something? Just tell them, because the more interesting play happens when people know things. And I fully agree with that, which is why I don't have perception checks in this game. And it's why knowledge domains exist, so that players just get fed information and also feed information back into the game. I really, really like this thing. Um, that doesn't necessarily mean, though, that it's always a guarantee that you know. We might want to make a check out of it. And like everything, it's a 4+ to succeed. Anytime you want to try and see if you know something and the GM doesn't want to just give it to you, um, they're going to make you roll for it. And it's a D6, but if it's common enough information, then they can make it a D8. If it's pretty rare, they might step it down to a D4, and then you just roll for it. On a hit, you get the information. On a miss, you don't know it. You might have to go seek that information out somewhere else. We'll talk about why perception checks are not in this game in a little bit, but I've already sort of alluded to it, right? Perception checks shouldn't exist. They're so boring. There are ways to play with information, giving information to players without worrying about doing check after check after check. And I also just think, and I agree with Chris McDowell, that the most interesting play happens when players have all the information. Also, again, Mike is very good at art. Look at this book over here. It's Hunt, which is another one of the games that I've designed, and it's a game that Mike did the layout and graphic design for. So he snuck Hunt onto the bookshelf here for this, which is very good. All right, this idea of like exceptions just basically says these are all the general rules, but anytime something specific happens, specific rules always override general rules, which makes sense. All right, in a game called Dragon Slayers, there's certainly going to be some combat. You're certainly going to be fighting things. How does it work? Again, I'm highlighting here and emphasizing to readers the rule of 4+ rides through everything. So now that we're in combat, we're not making skill checks and knowledge checks and things like that. It's still all about getting 4 and above on any dice that you're rolling. We do use abstracted ranges with Dragon Slayer, so there's no grid combat. I like a grid. A tactical combat and stuff like that. I'm actually working on games that use a grid. But for this game, for heroic fantasy, I don't like it. I just want us to kind of move around freely and be cool heroes and stuff like that. And so specific ranges in that sort of tactical level, that level of specificity, I just don't really care about with this particular type of game, which is why we just do close, near, and far. Now, that's how Slayers was written. And one thing about just doing abstract ranges is that can also be hard to work with. It's very hard to visualize in our heads because we can't track things as easily, especially if it's a complex fight that has lots of characters. And then also on top of that, we just might be imagining different things. And so I wanted to bring in zones and paths, which is something that I encountered when I read Binary Star Games' Valiant Horizon, which is another fantastic fantasy game, which basically says take the place that you're going to fight, slice it up into some zones, and connect those with paths. And now you can still do that abstract range stuff, but now people can at least visualize a little bit where people are. So two characters that are in the same zone as one another are close. If you're one path away, you're near. If you're two paths away, you're far. So we still get to keep our abstract ranges. We don't have to worry about, is this 30 feet or 40 feet? That doesn't matter. You're two paths away, so you are far distance from one another. Now you have easy, cool ways to make movement around, measure range, see where everybody is relative to one another. And because of these paths and zones, you can also mess around with this. Like, this is a mechanical thing that you can interact with. You can shut down these paths, right? We're not going to read the full monster catalog, but there are monsters in this book that do things to these zones and paths, cutting off paths so that suddenly characters can't move between two zones for a short period, or creating new zones that just shake up the battlefield. That's doable, obviously, with a grid. You can just draw lines and stuff and on a grid, but I think it's just kind of more fun to do it with this free form abstract map. This is a thing that got added to Slayers, and I love it, and it's in Dragon Slayers, which is the ready action, which is basically everybody gets to do something before the fight starts. The reason this exists is to give your character a chance to start doing the asymmetrical thing that they are known for doing. So, if every class is designed very differently from one another, we kind of want to prime the pump, so to speak. We want to get them ready to go when the fight starts, so everybody does something. And then everybody just rolls a speed die that is determined by their class, and we go from highest to lowest. Monsters don't roll. They have set speeds just because it's, let's try and reduce the amount of rolling if we're already going to be rolling a lot of dice. And we rock and roll. Rounds and turns are pretty typical. A round is when everybody gets a turn. A turn is when everybody gets to do their stuff. Look at this very cool hero slicing down on this cool beast right here. There are a couple of different actions. We'll talk about what those actions look like when we talk about some heroes. But we're trying to keep things relatively simple with this game. Move, we already talked about it. You're just moving between those zones. I don't have attacks of opportunity in this game. I don't think they're interesting. In fact, I think they're very uninteresting. Attacks of opportunity create situations in which characters become locked into place on a grid, right? Like if I'm next to a couple goblins, and it would be really cool and interesting if I moved away and did something somewhere else, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to take a bunch of attacks of opportunity. That just seems not fun. Like we're going to just end up sitting in the same spot on the grid over and over again. So if I want characters to feel free to move around, we have to remove the impediment that is going to cause that. Class actions are basically how you're going to attack as a character. It's casting spells, swinging weapons, and stuff like that. Support actions are usually free, and by that I mean you don't have to roll dice for most support actions. They are there to sort of help support whatever it is that character does. Skill actions, there are times when I run these games where somebody wants to do something that goes outside the scope of what their character, class actions and stuff are. Like they want to tackle a character or hide away or something like that. And in those instances, we just use the skill checks that we mentioned earlier in the game. And it's the same stuff as before. One thing I think is important when you do that in a sort of more free form type game as this is to just discuss it with the GM beforehand. Be like, hey, listen, I want to try and tackle this goblin boss so that we can restrain them and ask them some questions. And so you want to make sure that you just check in with the DM and say, this is sort of my goal. And if we all agree that that's doable, then we just make a check like we normally would. Recovering is just helping people from dying. Speaking of dying, pretty typical stuff in terms of health and harm, right? You have health, you take harm. Anytime you reach 0, you're dead. You might not want death in your game. That's totally reasonable, right? Some tables don't like character death, and so you just skip that, or you just manifest back at the camp later on. Character creation is fast. That's a pretty typical thing in most of my games. I want it to be something that we just get done quick so that you can be playing. So you're going to choose a class, set your hero die to D4, 2 advances, meaning you get 2 cool power-ups for your character, a talent, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You set your skills. So those skills that we mentioned earlier, you get one at a D10, which means there's one skill that you're really good at, one at a D8, which means another one that you're pretty good at, and then the rest are D6s, which means they're all basically coin tosses, whether or not you hit or not. You get that knowledge domain, some items, and then you're ready to rock and roll. I want to talk a little bit about fantasy races here. This is a setting agnostic fantasy game, meaning like there's no implied setting. You can drop this into whatever homebrew setting or existing setting that you want. I don't have rules for fantasy races or species in this game. In general, I don't think I mean, they just don't make sense to me. It's a weird thing to do to say like all orcs are strong and all elves are wise. Like that's just we know from our own species that that's not true, right? That like there's a wide range of wisdom and strength and all sorts of measurements. Not all of us are equally charismatic because we're human beings. And even if you want to slice it into race, where none of those things are universal as well. So it never really made sense to have fantasy races that just have generic bonuses to things. And so we're just not going to do that in Dragon Slayers. You can absolutely have different fantasy species in your game. They just have no mechanical benefit or disadvantage based off of that stuff. All right, so let's start talking about our classes. Again, here's just some like previews of them, but I think it's more interesting to go into the classes themselves. And let's start with the Barbarian. I actually wanted to start by looking at the art, which is fantastic. Look at that guy, just crushing goblins. Got a goblin biting him on the kneecap or the thigh right there. Um, the Barbarian is about the attack pool. That's their whole thing. So a couple things to note about the Barbarian. High health to start, slow speed. They're not a very quick person. And they have this thing called the attack pool, which is 2d4. Remember, 4 pluses are hits. D4 is only hit on a 25% chance, which means right away the Barbarian is not super effective, right? They're not like, it doesn't seem like they're going to hit a lot yet. The whole point of the Barbarian is to get that pool to grow and grow and grow. How do you get your attack pool to grow? Well, anytime you take harm as a Barbarian from any kind of source, you get to do one of the following. You can either add another d4 to your attack pool, no limit to that. So you can just keep adding and adding and adding. Every one that you add is another die that's a 25% chance of hitting. Or you can step up one of the dice that's already in your attack pool. So I could take one of those 2d4 that I start with and turn one of them into a d6. So now I got a d6 and a d4 when I roll. You see how the Barbarian works now, right? The Barbarian wants to get hurt. They want to just get pummeled with pain so that they can either keep adding dice or making those dice that they do have as big as possible to increase the odds that they hit. So they either want to play with the odds or get a bunch more opportunities to hit. So how do they do that all? Like, what do you do with that in combat? Well, the ready action with the Barbarian is when when the fight starts, you get to make a free movement. So you're slow out the gate, but you get to move right away. So you can close the gap, and you can use your howl support action, which we'll talk about in a second. Anytime you want to attack enemies, you use your attack action, which is your class action. You choose a monster at close range, which means anybody that's in the same zone as you, roll a giant pool of dice, and any that are hits are 2 harm per hit. The support action for the Barbarian then is Howl, which means you scream into the air, and you can either take harm, so you self-harm yourself, you hurt yourself essentially, which allows you to activate your attack pool thing, right? So in the very beginning of the fight, you go running forward, howl, and you can either immediately step up a die or add another d4 to your pool, or you can also taunt all of your enemies. Taunting them means essentially that they're going to attack you, and now you're going to get a bunch of harm. You're going to improve your attack pool. The thing about getting attacked a whole bunch is that you're going to eventually die. And so You have to be able to heal from that. So basically, you can shed dice from your attack pool and heal as a result. And the bigger the size of the die, the more healing you get. So if you've ever stepped up a die to a D12, you can shed it and heal 5 back from that. You have to keep at least one die in your attack pool. It doesn't matter what size it is. But this is a way to sort of recover. We're not going to read all of the advances and everything like that, but basically you can just get better and better at that. The one other thing that classes have is they have a camp feature, which allows them to help the whole party, either when there's a camp time when you're doing some resting, or just provides an ongoing benefit. So the barbarians is the latter. Whenever a hero advances, they get improved health by rolling a d4. If you have a barbarian in your party, you roll a d4 twice and you get to choose the higher one. So the barbarian encourages everybody in their party to be a little bit more durable. The bard plays Yahtzee. It's basically the easiest way to explain it. They're, as you can see, much squishier than the barbarian, a little bit quicker. They have a perform pool. And unlike the other classes, the bard simply does not care about the rule 4+. What the bard cares about is specific values of dice. Let's talk about that. First of all, wow. Wow, look at that bard. Incredible art by Mike. Similar to the barbarian, at the start of a fight, you can either add a d6 to your perform pool, or you can inspire another hero. Your class action is called perform. You're going to sing a song or do a dance or whatever it is that you want to do. You choose one of these effects and you always get the base effect. So there's a given success right away out the gate for the bard. And then you roll the dice. And if you get a pair or a straight, kind of playing Yahtzee with your perform pool, you get to get an improved version of that thing. So for example, inspire. Choose a hero. They roll an additional d6 with their next action that includes a roll. If you roll your perform pool and get a pair, now you get to choose 2 heroes to inspire. Or if you get a straight, they get to roll an additional d8 instead. So the bard has all these guaranteed wins, and they're sort of gambling on trying to get a better version of that with their perform pool. They can get more dice in their pool. Their advances are all about sort of improving that pool or getting better chances at rolling those things. So that's what the bard is all about. I like the bard's camp feature quite a bit, which is once per long rest, a hero can go up onto the stage and perform. And in doing so, everybody steps up their hero die once beyond its maximum value. This is really nice, especially for level, like, there's no levels in this game, but like new heroes, they only have that D4 as a hero die. If you have a bard in your party and you rest, now everybody has a D6, which means you get to use your hero die twice before it's spent. You sort of get to break the rules going beyond the limits, especially inspiring performance. Hey, thank you so much for the congrats on the release. I really appreciate that. Cleric. Cleric is the diceless class. So we just talked about rolling big pools of dice to get hits. We talked about rolling dice to get Yahtzee results. Now this class, no dice for them. Let's look at the art. I love this cleric. It's super cool. As you can see, the cleric is going to be sort of the support class. How do they work? A little bit beefier, decent speed. They have these things called Blessing and Bane dice. I know I said it's a diceless class, and it is. These dice are not for the cleric. These are for the cleric to give away as little treats to friends and foes. Throughout the fight, the cleric is going to be giving blessing dice and bane dice to other characters. When the cleric gives a blessing die to a friend, that friend has a blessing die, and they can use it at any time to do one of two things. They can either add the blessing die to their roll to gain more hits. Hey, remember that barbarian up above that wants a giant pool of dice? Now they've got another one to add to their attack pool when they roll. Or the bard who's trying to get Yahtzee rolls, they got another die in their pool now to get a better chance of getting that straight when they roll it. Or they can roll the blessing die in add it to a result. This might allow you to change something that is a miss, right? You might roll a 3 and then you roll a blessing die and it adds and it gets you up to that 4 or above. Turn something from a miss into a hit. This is also like for what you call it, the this is especially helpful for the rogue and the ranger classes, which actually, or especially the ranger class, which is trying to get a certain, like a really high value on their roll. This is a really helpful way of using the blessing die. The other thing about a blessing die is as long as you're holding one, anytime the cleric casts a miracle, you automatically get the benefit. So this is like an ongoing buff that you have that you can spend at any time to improve yourself. But as long as you're holding it, you also are beholden to these cool, like awesome things that the cleric is going to give you. Banes go onto enemies, and they're basically the opposite of this thing, like the rolling and adding it. This works for enemies in the opposite way. Anytime an enemy rolls and they have a Bane die, they have to subtract away the Bane die's value from their thing. This is going to mean that monsters are going to miss a lot as long as they have Bane dice on them. It also means that as long as you are holding a Bane die, the cleric can cast a curse on you. It's the opposite of the miracle thing. So remember, this is a diceless class, right? You're not rolling any of these dice. You're handing these out as little treats to people and just sitting back and watching the fight kind of manifest the way that you are. This is how I like to play um, control or like support classes, right? This and the tactician from Slayers, those are how I like to be a support class. I don't like to just heal. Tactician was all about like swapping dice around, and this is about me giving treats to players to let them decide how they want to be improved. So how does it work? Ready action for the very beginning, give a die, a blessing or a bane. Here's those miracles and curses. So you activate these at any point in time, or not any point, on your turn. And anybody who's holding a blessing gets the miracle. You can heal all of them. You can improve their speed for the fight, changing the turn order. They get advantage on their next roll. Curses are basically the opposite of all those things, affecting all the monsters that have Bane dice. Your support actions, giving out more of these dice, or just doing a little bit of healing or harm. Again, notice there's no rolling on this, it just happens. The advances are all about improving those odds or giving out more dice. The camp feature for our cleric basically says, hey, if anybody dies, they are healed instead, once per session. This is, especially helpful if you've all agreed as a party to allow character death. This helps prevent that a little bit. All right, that's 3 classes down. Let's talk about the fighter. First of all, more incredible art by Mike Riemann. Here's our sword and board fighter. The fighter is not the damage dealer of the group. They can deal damage, obviously, but they're not the primary DPS person. That's the rogue, or the barbarian, or maybe even the ranger. The fighter is a solid, reliable. They can deal some damage and they can do some support and defensive stuff. And I kind of like that sword and board rule. So they're a little bit beefier. They have these things called arms, the arms pool. And basically you have 2 armaments, your sword and your shield. And you're going to be assigning that pool to those dice throughout the fight, swapping them around to be better or worse at swinging your sword or using your shield at things. When a fight breaks out as a fighter, you assign those 2d6 to your sword and shield. You can put them 1 in each, so you have a d6 on your sword, d6 on your shield, or you could put both onto 1. Maybe you want to start out the gate heavy on sword, 2d6, or both on the shield. You want to be really defensive, 2d6 on the shield. And you'll see why you have that is because you have these 4 different class actions that have you roll the dice assigned to either the sword or the shield. So sword stab, roll your sword arms dice. If I've only assigned 1 d6 to it, then I only can get 1 hit. If I roll both d6 to my sword, now I have a chance to get 2 hits, 3 harm per hit. That's a pretty big amount of harm that I can do. Or I can cleave people. Or if I want to go big on defense, right? I can do this, and this reduces harm, or I can push enemies or reduce their effectiveness. And so for you as the fighter, you are moving these arms dice and adapting throughout the fight. That's your whole thing is shifting yourself from being more offensive or defensive depending on what is needed in the fight. So you can move a die from one side to the other. So I can move that d6 from my shield to my sword if I need to go heavy, or I can swap two dice. And the swapping at the start doesn't really make sense, right? If they're both d6. But as you can see here, you can increase the size of these dice so that maybe you have one is a D10 and the other is a D6, and suddenly you realize, ooh, I need to swap these. I got that D10 on my sword, but we're kind of getting our asses kicked. Let's swap that D10 over to the shield so I can be really defensive, but still decent with my sword. I really like this fighter. This is, I think, an adaptable, interesting fighter that isn't just I swing my sword over and over again. It is thinking about how to be offensive and defensive. It's pretty cool. Each hero gets a +1 modifier on any skill. I think it's just a nice, simple camp feature for the fighter. They just want everybody to be better. The Ranger. The Ranger is a modified version of the Deadeye class that I created for Slayers, which is all about shooting and trying to get a crit. You have an arrow die, which is a D10. Ooh, that's pretty high. That deals a lot of harm, and you have this thing called focus. For the Ranger, I wanted the Ranger to be very dangerous, and I want them to get more and more dangerous the longer the fight goes on. And that is manifested through the crit mechanic. So if at any point in time, the total of your roll when you're rolling to attack something is a 10 plus, you crit. How do you get to 10 plus? Well, you have a 10, so there's 1 in 10 odds, I guess. But let's think about this. Without even getting to the rest of the Ranger's kit, there are other things that we've seen so far that could help with this. For example, the Cleric, right? The Cleric could give you a blessing die that lets you roll that along with your arrow die and add to it. Now you have a chance of getting a D10 without needing to even think about all the rest of the Ranger kit. But there is stuff in your Ranger kit that helps you. Anytime you roll an attack roll, you're going to gain +1 focus. And focus is always added to your attack roll. So you're going to get closer and closer and closer to getting a crit. Also, look at this Ranger. Look at this cool, like, Orc Ranger. Very cool. At the start of the fight, you're going to either breathe or lay a trap. We'll see what those are in a second. Like I said, anytime you're going to shoot something, the Ranger is one of the very few people that can work at far range. Almost nobody else in this game works at far range. So I wanted you to really get the benefit of being from a distance. You roll your arrow die, add your focus, and if you get that 10 plus, you crit. Even if you don't get a 10 plus, you can still hit. And even if you miss, you're going to get focus. So you're just getting better and better and better as the fight goes. The support action, breathe, so you can get yourself, you can take a moment to sort of assess things, you get faster, gain focus, or you lay a trap. And I just kind of liked the idea of the Ranger also being kind of a scamp and leaving traps all over the place. This camp feature I think is interesting. The way that it works is you can put the corpse of any non-humanoid monster. So we're not putting up like weird corpses of like guards that we killed. But like you put a weird non-humanoid monster onto this trophy rack and you all study it. And now you know how to better hunt these things. And all heroes deal +1 harm against monsters that are the same or very similar to that trophy. So, if we kill a bear and we put it on there, then anytime we ever deal with other bears, we're better at killing bears now. We kill a dragon and we put it up on the trophy rack. Now, anytime we hunt dragons, we're dragon hunters, right? We're dragon slayers. We're very good at killing dragons. The Rogue, the one class that I absolutely had to nerf because of playtesting. This was easily the most powerful class, and it's still pretty dangerous. but Josh Hiddy, who was one of the playtesters for this, really showed me how deadly the rogue was. The rogue is about getting one big hit in. That's what they're all about. They have a dagger die, and they use it whenever they do the murder action. What is the murder action? Oh, notice that their speed is high too. D8. That's pretty quick. That's going to matter. Speed is the name of the game for the rogue. That's the thing that they care about more than anything else. At the start of combat, after everybody has determined their speed, you learn the turn order. You know exactly the numbers, the specific numbers of everybody, and then you can do something. You can either re-roll your speed die, get a little faster, or reduce the speed of any target -1. Why does speed matter? Because that's what your class action, your murder action, is all about. Get up close, stab somebody with your dagger. On a hit, you deal harm based off of the difference in speed between you and the target. If you have a higher speed, cool. You deal harm equal to 1 plus that difference. And this is why you want to be faster now, right? You can see it. If you have an 8 speed and you're attacking a monster that has a 3 speed, right? That difference is 5. So it's 1 plus 5. That's 6 harm that you're dealing to that monster. That's a lot of harm in this game. And so you can see why you want to either have highest possible speed or you're going to be slowing people down. If you have the same or slower speed, you're just dealing 1 harm. On a miss, you reduce your speed. I want to punish the rogues for like not attacking in the most ideal situation possible. And so you get a chance to sort of improve those odds. Your support actions allow you to reduce the speed of any target close to you. There's just -1 for the rest of the fight. Or you have the chance to increase your own speed. Now, this is universally better than this, right? Because this only affects one person. So this had to be a roll. This had to be a check, an athletics check, because there had to be the opportunity that you would miss this. Because if you could, you would always choose this over fight dirty, because you increasing your speed is always going to be better than just decreasing the speed of one character. And so it made sense to make this a check and the other one a guaranteed outcome. The advances are all about getting the best possible advantage and murdering more effectively. The wealth die is a thing that the rogue messes with, which we haven't talked about yet, but it's the party's money, essentially. And you have the opportunity to make the party some money while on a rest. You also have the opportunity to lose money for the party. You don't have to do this. It's a may roll, but the rogue, they're connected to people. They might want to try and make some money for everybody. The warlock. I love, pardon me, I love this warlock class. First of all, I love this art. Look at this warlock art. It's so terrifying. It's an incredible art. And so the warlock, slow, very weak, 4 health, D4, and they have a favor die. That's a D4. So they don't start. They sound pretty awful, honestly, to start. They're not very good. You have a patron. Of course you do. You're a warlock. The patron is going to give you a boon, which we'll talk about in a second here. But first of all, you should just figure out who your patron is and just describe them. And the favor die is sort of the gatekeeper for how powerful of a spell you can access when it's your turn. The higher your favor die, meaning the more favorably the patron looks upon you, the better spells you have access to throughout a fight. How does that work? Well, at the very beginning, your patron gives you a gift. This applies for just this fight, but you can choose one. Increase your maximum health. Hey, you're not as weak anymore. Increase your speed. You can move twice per movement if you want to be really mobile. Or it gives you a consumable, an item that allows you to heal 5. Any of these are good options, but you get a thing at the start of the fight. Here's how your spell casting works. You can cast any spell on this list, which is a list of 7 spells, that has a die size equal to or less than your current favor die, which means in the beginning you can only cast Arcane Bolt and abyssal armor, which means you want to get better and better favor because it unlocks more and more spells for you. Also, as you get more and more favor, your die size goes up. You're going to increase the odds that you hit, right? Remember, rule of 4 plus. So if I've reached a D10, I have access to a lot of spells, and I'm really likely to hit when I roll these spells. So you're going to want to get that favor as soon as you possibly can. And the spells just get kind of better and better along the way. One harm to a near monster all the way up to all monsters take 3 harm. That's pretty awesome, especially if you're fighting like a bunch of monsters. If you can just go boom, like 3 harm wipes out a lot of low level monsters like skeletons and goblins and stuff like that. They're just gonna die. But you got to get the favor in order to do that. How do you do that? You have to give. You have to give. You got to give. You sacrifice something. And you choose one of these things, and then you step up your favor die, and it stays stepped up for that fight. So you can take harm. In the beginning, taking 1 harm sucks, right? It's you. What did I say? I think you have 4 health, right? So you're gonna lose a quarter of your health, but it steps up your favor die, and now you get access to more powers and more likely to succeed. -1 speed for the fight, -1 action on your next turn. You only get 2 actions, so now suddenly you're only doing 1, or destroy a consumable, lose that consumable forever. But every time you do these things, you get better and better odds at hitting your spells and getting and access to more spells as a result. I like the camp feature of the Warlock a lot too. Once per long rest, a hero can look into this mirror that your patron gave you and kind of change themselves. They could swap the die sizes of any 2 skills that they have. So if you're going into a day of adventuring and realizing that you're going to need athletics and your character doesn't have a lot of athletics, you might go, today I'm going to be a bit more athletic. I'm going to swap out my D10 that I have in negotiation, and I'm going to put it into athletics. I'm going to be bad at negotiating, but I'm going to be good at climbing because we're going up into the mountains, and I want to be able to climb more effectively. And it's just for the day, and you swap those dice around, and I think that's a really fun mechanic. Our last class to go over here is the Wizard. The Wizard is basically, did you ever play the computer game Magica? Because that's what the Wizard is. Magica was a computer game that I remember playing a long time ago where you would activate spells by combining elements that you just sort of summoned. And you had to learn what elemental combinations created which spell effects. So some elements would blow up in your face, others would give you cool effects, and that's how the Wizard works. The Wizard has 3 different elements: destruction, mending, and warping, and they are going to roll those and combine them and then decide what spell they do. It's a little different than normal spell casting where you say, I'm going to cast this spell, and then you see if you do it. Like, that's how the Warlock works. This is, I'm going to roll my element dice, and then I'm going to see what I can do with the elements that I have. At the start of the fight, you can step up. Remember, that increases the size of the dice because they're all D4s. They're not very good to start. Step up 2 of them. Maybe you just know that you want to be more destructive, or you want to be more mending or more warping. You choose 2 of them to increase for the fight, so you have a little bit better odds. The Wizard's a little weird. In terms of complexity of these classes, this might be the most complex class. Because again, it's not I choose to cast this spell. It's I am going to roll these dice and then make a spell out of it. So you roll 2 of the element dice that you have, and if it's a hit, you get to use that element. If it's a miss, you can't use that die. So it means you can potentially use 2 elements when you cast a spell. You can roll the same element die twice, so you can roll and go all in on destruction or mending or warping, or you can roll different combinations, but you can only use the dice that hit. Once you have that, you have a list of spells that you can use to um, to make your spells. So let's say I only rolled destruction dice. Well, that casts Firebolt, which chooses a target at near or far, and they deal 1 harm per hit. If I rolled 2 destruction dice and both hit, cool, I get to do 2 harm. If only one of them hit, I only get to do 1 harm. And then you can start to see where we can start to combine them. If I roll the destruction die and a mending die and they both hit, I can cast Empower. All heroes increase the harm of their next action +2. Or if I rolled a mending die and a warping die and they both hit, I can cast Swift. All heroes may either immediately take a free move or a free support action. That's pretty awesome, right? You've seen what support actions do for the other classes. To suddenly be able to just do that, that's pretty powerful. But it only works if the wizard rolls a mending die and a warping die and they both hit. So you've already stepped up some of those dice at the start of the fight to increase those odds. And your support action allows you to shift those things around a little bit. So you can step up a die of one element and have to step down another when you do that. But that allows you to really increase the odds of like getting one particular hit and then maybe decrease the odds. And you can shift that throughout the fight. I like the wizard being an alchemist at the same time. The camp feature for the wizard lets them just make a consumable that they give to the party, whoever they want. So once per rest, you get to make a consumable healing potion, potion of haste, or steel soup. And you just give that to somebody. And I think that's a fun little mechanic. All right, those are our classes. That was kind of like the biggest, beefiest section of the rules to get through. I wanted one other little point of deviation in the classes, and that's where the talent comes from. This is kind of similar to like feats or perks or things like that in other games. You just get like a little bonus treat to your character. Again, these are not linked to fantasy classes or races. These are things that you might see in other fantasy games that are linked to fantasy races, like increasing your maximum health or increasing your speed modifier. But rather than linking it to a fantasy race or a species, it's just something about your background, right? Talents allow you to show off a bit of your background. Why are you better at speed? Because you're graceful. You've always been a graceful person. I'm just a beefier guy, and so I've just got a little bit more health. Um, my favorite talent is the learned one, which allows you to create a new knowledge domain, different from all the others. So you have a new thing that you know about that nobody else knows about. And that's really cool. I like that. That's the one I would choose. Mechanically, probably the least immediately helpful compared to some of these others. Um, like twice per session gaining advantage. That's pretty nice. Um, but this is the one that I would choose personally. Um, you know, we now as a group have established sort of some of the lore of our table, the world that we're going to be in, and maybe we need a knowledge domain that just isn't covered in the ones that I created in the core rules. And I've manifested the opportunity for you to be the person who's the expert on that thing. New from Slayers is the idea of items. Your characters can carry some items, but they can only carry certain types of items. They're not going to carry weapons. You're never going to find a +1 sword or an enchanted axe or anything like that in this game because your characters don't have weapons. I mean, they do, right? But they don't have weapon dice that they're rolling, right? I guess technically, the rogue has the dagger die, but they're not going to find another like +1 dagger or something like that. The dagger die just represents the rogue's ability to murder people. So you're not going to find new armor and weapons and stuff like that in the weapons list or in the items list. Instead, it's magic items, which are the fun thing in fantasy games, and consumables. Those are the only two types of things. You can carry up to 3 of each of those things. So magic items can give you just nice little perks, winged shoes, giant skin. They can also give you cool things like lie piercer. You can always detect when somebody's lying to you, or you can walk on the walls like a spider. That's fun little perks that magic items can give you. Consumables, they're consumables. You drink them, you use them, they're gone. One and done sort of thing. Same thing. Some of them can be very overtly mechanical. Some of them can be very silly, like temporarily become incorporeal. How does it manifest at your table? Well, I'll allow you to sort of play around with that. Gold pieces are, such a core part of fantasy games, collecting gold and money and stuff like that. But I just don't like tracking gold. I just don't think it's very interesting. And so I wanted to sort of abstract it out. And so, in order to do that, I basically said, let's just say you have a wealth die that applies to everybody. So the whole party just sort of pools their wealth. That also stops the whole like shenanigans of like stealing from each other or not splitting the loot fairly. Everybody shares the same wealth. Um, and the wealth die starts as a D4. And anytime you want to buy something, you roll the wealth die. On a hit, you get the thing. And then the wealth die steps down. If it's a D4, you don't have any money anymore. You're broke again. You got to go get something. On a miss, you don't have enough money. You don't lose the wealth. You just didn't have enough money, or the merchant doesn't have it, or the merchant's being stubborn, or something like that. You got to go get more money. How do you improve this wealth die? You can find money, right? You just go adventuring, right? Anytime you sell things or find a treasure hoard, just increase your wealth die. Also, the rogue. The rogue can gamble away your money during long rests, right? They can potentially increase your wealth die while you're all resting. They could also lose your money, but it's a fun place to play gamble with that. Adventuring, this is just a couple of guidelines on how to create adventures. I personally don't use pre-written adventures with my games, which means this book isn't full of pre-made quests and stuff like that. I have infinitely more fun discovering the adventure along the way rather than creating the whole thing. I recognize that that's not how everybody likes to prep games, but it's how I like to prep games. But when it comes to adventures, you basically need to have these three things. You need somebody to give you the job. There needs to be a reason why this thing matters. And you need some sort of payoff. And as long as you have those things, you're going to be happy. Here's some prompts that you can use in case you need that. We don't track travel in this game. There are other games where travel is super important. It's just not important here. I want you to be straight to the adventure. You get to rest, short rest and long rest. Short rests allow you to heal a little, get that hero die back up. And you can also long rest once per session. And that's where you get access to a lot of those camp actions, like the rogue gambling your money away or staring into the warlock mirror and stuff like that. Just simple rest mechanics. Advancement in this game is basically, do you get better? How do you get better in this game? You answer some questions. It's very similar to how, a lot of PBTA games work or Forge in the Dark games. I like that. You just need 5 experience to level up, which means you can't level up in one session, but you can level up, you know, across 2 sessions. And so it takes X number of sessions in order to level up. When you advance, you increase your hero die permanently. That's pretty cool. You get healthier, increase a skill, and choose one of your advances. Notice that eventually you're going to hit max level after only a few advances. But, like I said, it takes at least 2 sessions in order to advance usually. How can you keep playing the game? Well, first of all, I don't design games to be your forever game, so I don't anticipate this being a game that you play for 2 years straight. But if you find yourselves doing that, you're going to want some other options. So I give some ideas about how you might want to expand advancement in case your characters hit that max level and you want more, besides just getting like magic items and stuff. You know, um, create some new skills or knowledge domains that your characters can lean into, create some new class advances, or just focus on getting cool stuff. I think cool stuff is enough, but that doesn't apply to everybody. We're not going to read the full monster catalog, but I do want to just highlight how monsters work in this game. They work very similar to characters, except they don't have like ready actions and class actions and support actions, but they are all unified by that rule of 4 plus. So monsters might have passives that are just ongoing things. Um, for example, this spider can move between zones that are not connected by a path. Shows this sort of like web spinning nature of a spider. Anytime a monster wants to take an action, there are dice assigned to them that they roll, and then a range and an effect. And just like everybody else, they need to get a 4 plus. So a bite, this howling spider has a 50-50 shot at successfully biting a close character. Um, they have a pretty low odds of shrieking, but shriek is pretty awesome. If they do it, that hero is frozen in fear and takes one fewer action on their turn. And monsters have reactions. Once they can use one of them per round. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Look at that little guy. So that's how monsters work. We're like I said, we're not going to read through the full bestiary, but there's a whole bunch of monsters that you can fight. I do want to talk about dragons, though. It is called Dragon Slayers, right? So we should fight some dragons. Dragons are the boss monsters in this game, meaning you want to try and kill these things because they're going to give you cool loot, but also they're terrifying. Dragons work a little bit different than other monsters in that they take a turn after every single hero and on their own turn. They're extremely dangerous. They also have roost rules, which are kind of like layer actions in other games, and draconic actions, which are like layer actions that they can do. And so they're very, very scary. Um, and actually, just as I get to dragons, I can hear my daughter waking up. You might hear her on the mic as well, which means we are going to have to cut this design commentary short. I will do part two as soon as I can. Part two, which will be posted up as soon as I record it, we'll finish our discussion of dragons. We'll talk about the conversion between Slayers and Dragon Slayers and the DM section, and that will be our design commentary. So thanks so much for watching part one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you at part